Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kaf Gimel in Masechet Avodah Zarah. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. We are in the middle of, we just started yesterday the second chapter of Masechet Avodah Zarah. In the first chapter, we dealt with the times and things that we cannot sell and engage in business with idolaters. And now the Gemara has turned in the second chapter to things that we just can't do in general. And so, for example, specifically, our Mishnah noted. Let me share my screen one second so that way you can see. Our Mishnah noted that you're not allowed to house your animals with an idolater because we're concerned that they will engage in bestiality with animals that don't belong to them. So we can't leave, and so as we pick up with the last word on the seventh line from the bottom of Kaf Bet Amabet 22b, the Gemara wonders, is this also true for birds? Meaning, birds also are animals. Do we worry about bestiality in connection with birds as well? And so, again, seven lines up, last word on the line on Kaf Bet Amud Bet, Ibailahu. They ask the question, Ophos Mai, what's the story with respect to birds? So, Tashma, come and hear how awful idolaters are, and you'll see that in fact the answer is yes, we won't even put a bird with them. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Mishum Rabbi Chanina, that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Ani Ra'iti, Ovid Kochavim Shalakach Avaz Minashuk. I saw an idol worshiper buy a goose in the market. Riva'ah, he had relations with it. Chanaka, he strangled it. Tzla'ah, he roasted it. Va'achala, and he ate it. Amar Rav Yirmiyah ben Difti, and Rav Yirmiyah ben Difti said you didn't even need to necessarily, what's the story with the, how could he possibly have done such a thing? Meaning it's maybe there isn't room. Ani re'iti arvi, I saw an Arab echad shalakach yarech minashuk. He bought a thigh from the marketplace. V'chakakba, he made a hole in it, kedei revia, in order to, interact with it. Riva, he in fact engaged in bestiality. Tzla'am, again, he roasted it, va'achala, and he ate it. So again, they are very much not what we would say is good behavior. And so as a result, you should not give any kind of animal to an idolater. Now, again, the question is how does this apply in today's world? So in general, certainly in the United States, we would say that because of the regulations associated with bestiality, you're not allowed to do it. It's considered animal abuse, and if anybody were to be caught, they would be in big trouble. In general, that's probably the strongest reason to say that we're not concerned about it, because again, we remember back to the last few days, we've noted the fact that in certain circumstances, for example, if it's the idolater's own animal, they don't want to do this because they don't want to ruin the animal. And so as a result, when in fact it is from their own side that they are really concerned about it and there's something that's going to happen to them, so then there's an argument to say that these rules would not apply. And so that's probably the strongest reason to say that these rules don't apply. But okay, yesterday again we had this prohibition about putting animals with an idolater. But at the same time, we said that you're allowed to buy an idolater's animal in order to bring a sacrifice. So how do we balance these two? How, on the one hand, can you not store your animal with an idolater because we're worried that the idolater is going to engage in bestiality, and yet you're allowed to buy an animal from an idolater, even though if one were to have engaged in bestiality, that animal would become prohibited to be used as a sacrifice. So how do we understand that? So yesterday we answered effort number one. We explained in the name of Rav that in fact the point is that the non-Jews, the idolaters, would not engage in bestiality with their own animal because they're worried about the financial repercussions. But when it comes to somebody else's animal, well, then they'll have no problem. So as a result, you can't leave your animal with them because that would be a problem. But you can buy an animal from them because they're not going to engage in bestiality with their own animals. Ravina suggests a different answer to this apparent contradiction. Lo kasha halachatchila hadiavad. One is lichatchila and one is b'diavad. That in when we ask the question about are we allowed to put our animals with an idolater, the answer is no, because we're worried about them in some future time engaging in bestiality with our animal. But if in fact an animal was put with the non-Jew or was owned by the non-Jew, so then we would not worry about it. So this is in some ways an expansion of the sense of saying that that the idolaters would not engage in bestiality. So that's the potential answer. Now we are going to now ask a question on that answer and eventually come to the conclusion that Ravina isn't necessarily correct. Not definitively not correct, but isn't necessarily correct. So Minna Tamra Deshayni Ben Lechatchila Ben L'Diavad. How do I know that we should make such a distinction, that we actually would have a distinction in law associated with whether or not something we're talking about the past or the future? Well, Ditanan, listen to what we have in our own Mishnah. Lotis yached isha imahen. A woman is not allowed to be secluded with them. Because we're worried that she would engage in inappropriate relations, and so as a result, you shouldn't have a woman shouldn't be alone with them. But on the other hand, or a minhu, it seems like we have another Mishnah that seems to contradict. This is a Mishnah in Ksubot Dav Kavav Amud Bet. Ha'isha shenechbasha bidei ovdei kochavim. If you have a woman who has been imprisoned, who has been captive by an idolater, al yedei mamon, if it's a monetary matter, muteris lebala. Then when she goes back to her husband, she's allowed to go back to her husband. But al yedei nefashot, if it was a capital crime for which she has been imprisoned and accused, well then asuru levala, she can't go back to her husband because presumably they're not going to respect her as much, and so as a result, we're not going to do it. So elalav shmamina shiny lan bein lechatchilo l'diavad. That here we see that we're distinguishing, because in a case of lechatchila, that's our Mishnah where we say you can't be there no matter what. But in the case of the captives, where the captive was only captive for a monetary matter, and many understand this to mean that the husband owed money, and so they took her as ransom. So then that's going to show that we're not worried about it. And that seems to be a b'diavad case where it's already happened. And so as a result, doesn't this all show that that's what matters? And therefore, based on that, Ravina says in our case, when it comes to bestiality, that when it comes to lichatchila, when we're worried about the future, of course we won't put the animal with the idolater. But if the animal was already with the idolater and the question is us buying the animal, so then we will consider that to be b'diavad, meaning that we won't say that necessarily in the recent past that they engage in bestiality with this particular animal. So mimai, but one second, your proof of trying to show this distinction between b'diavad and lichatchila is not necessarily a good one. Dilma la'olam emalach afilu diavad namilo. Maybe really we should always be concerned about even in the past a situation where a woman is with an idolater. And the reason that specifically in a monetary case we're going to say that it's okay is the misyare mishum hefsed mamono, because the idolater's worried that if he in fact were to, God forbid, violate this woman, he won't get paid. Exactly, because the man won't want to pay it back. He'll want proof of life, etc. In a typical case of kidnapping. Thank you. That's exactly the word I was trying to remember. So So that's exactly right. So really what our Hava Amina was that the case of a death penalty case was a uniquely negative case, and therefore specifically in that case we wouldn't have this concept of bidiavad because they would treat her so poorly. But now we're saying no, no, no. Maybe actually always we're worried about it, and it's even in the one case that we're not worried, it's the special case, and that's why we're not worried. So okay, to misyore mishum hefsed mamona. So and teda de katani seifa al yedei nefashos asur levala. And in fact, you can support this by understanding. How do we understand the case of the fact that if she were captive because of a capital crime, so then she's going to be forbidden to her husband. Vitsulo midi, and therefore there's nothing more to say. And now there are two ways we can understand this. Visulo midi, meaning that there's nothing more to say, and Ravina is wrong. Or we can say like Tosos. So let's take a look at that Tosos so that we can see it. It's the second to last Tosos on the page. And so let me just scroll my screen so that the full Tosos language is in English on the screen. So Visulo midi, Perish devadai hefsed mamon, right? The point is that there would definitely be a loss of money if in fact he were to have relations. So shiny, that case is different. Aval yichud ba'alma, but in a general case, if a man if an idolatrous man is alone with a Jewish woman, well then ema de'asur af b'diavad. If it's a married woman, she's going to be prohibited to go back to her husband, even b'diavad, even in the case where it already happened. But Tema, imkain lo hanachos basla Abraham Avinu Ashes Kohen Yosheves Tachas Bala. How could any wife of a Kohen stay with her husband, and for that matter, any wife of a Jew stay with her husband? Isn't it always the case that at some point in the person's life, again, living among idolatrous people, that you'll be alone with some idolater, that some woman will be alone with an idolater, sha'achas, for some amount of time, for 1 hour, for 1 minute. But the point is that there's a certain amount of time. We usually, when a couple gets married, we give them time alone, and it's like 8 or 9 minutes that we say that they should be alone in order for them to have the opportunity, although they usually don't do it in that particular location because they're in a wedding hall. But the point is they have the opportunity to be with one another. So the point is that's the amount of time that we would be ordinarily worried about yichud with somebody else. And if that's the principle that's applying here, well, then how does any Jew stay married to his wife? So v'kevan deleka hefsed mamon. In most cases, there is no loss of money associated with it. Chayshinan, so we should be worried. So that's Tosos's question. Is it sort of like, based on where the Gemara concludes that we should be worried about this? So the answer number one is that this is not actually contradicting Ravina's point, but rather we're just saying that we can't prove Ravina's point. Kolomar, mahacha lo tochiach. You can't necessarily bring a proof from here. Umikol makom divrei Ravina emes hein. But really, Ravina is correct that when it comes to b'diavad, we're not worried about it. V'od yesh lomar. Or you can give the following answer. Da'afilu l'fi amaskana. Ein la'asor yichud muat. That in fact, when we say that in the b'diavad case that we're going to be worried, we're not talking about a yichud muat. We're not talking about being alone with an idolater for a small amount of time. Dedavka nechbesha. It's specifically where she was captive, shiny. That's the case that's different. Lefisha mesura biyada, because in that case she is fully under the control of the idolater. Cain behema, just like the animal that we're worried about putting with an idolater. Dahacha, that's in our case of the fact that we don't put an animal with an idolater. To be yado lirava, that he has that the supervisor or the watcher of the animal has the ability to engage in bestiality. But but where she's not under the control of the idolater at all, and she has the ability to call out, and somebody will come and rescue her. So in that case, the idolater will certainly be afraid of doing anything. And therefore we don't have to prohibit her. As a result of that being alone. And that's in fact, I think, the right answer. Isha lebehema. Then in Yerushalmi, it actually goes further and says that you can't necessarily compare a woman to an animal. So shiny Isha should darko litzvot, because a woman has the ability to call out. Ba'afilu chareshes, even somebody who's deaf, Darko Laremes, she'll be able to give hints and tell what happened. So the point is that as a result, people will be afraid. And so therefore, you don't necessarily learn from the animal case to the human case. And so as a result, we won't necessarily say that just because a Jewish woman is alone with an idolater that they engage in a relationship, and therefore would cause the woman, if she were married, to be prohibited to her husband, assuming that that was a voluntary relationship. Okay, so that's the second potential answer to our distinction between why in our Mishnah we say you can't leave an animal with an idolater, and the Mishnah elsewhere that says that you can buy an animal for a sacrifice from an idolater. But now we have Rabbi Padat's answer. So Rabbi Padat Amar Lo Kasha. This is not really a difficult contradiction, because Rabbi Eliezer, our Mishnah follows Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is worried about bestiality. Ha-Rabbanan. And the other position is the rabbis. Ditanan gabe paras chatas. That because what did we learn with respect to para aduma? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Eina nikachas mina ovdei kochavim. Rabbi Eliezer says you can't buy it from an idol worshiper. But chachamim matirim, and the chachamim say you can. My love, b'hakamivlgi. And what are they really arguing about? They're arguing about this. The Rabbi Eliezer Savar Chayshin and L'Revia, that we're worried about bestiality. The Rabbanan Savar Lo Chayshin and L'Revia. We're not worried about bestiality. And so that's really what's going on. And of course, now, if this in fact ends up being the conclusion, and we'll see that this is the conclusion, we can now understand how we can leave animals with idolaters, because the rabbis, which is the majority, and therefore usually how we paskin, would say that we don't actually have to be worried about idolaters engaging in bestiality. So 3 challenges. Again, all 3 of the challenges are going to fail. And so as a result, Rabbi Padas will offer us a second potential answer to this potential contradiction between our Mishnah that says that we're worried about bestiality, and the Mishnah that says you can buy an animal from an idolater for a sacrifice, which implies that you cannot. So Mimai, how do you know that in fact this is what the argument is about? Dilma dekuli alma lo chashin l'Ravia. Maybe both Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim are not worried about bestiality. And why is it that Rabbi Eliezer is worried and says you cannot buy a para aduma animal from an idolater? So to Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rab, because Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rab, Hanir chalean uda shel sakin, if you were to put on an animal, even a bag of bags. Now, let me just back up and just note that a para aduma animal must not have ever done work. It cannot have ever done work. Now, what does work mean? So what happens if you're walking along and you've got a bag of empty bags? And as anybody who's carried a bag of empty bags, maybe you're recycling the plastic bags, it's not that heavy. And yet you decide, you know what, I just got to tie my shoelace or whatever, and you put it on this potential para aduma animal. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rab, psala, that empty bag of bags, that bag of empty bags has now made your para aduma worthless, because it's now done work, and so as a result, it is puzzle. Uve egla. But when it comes to an egla arufa, where there's also a prohibition of it having done work, that egla arufa, as a reminder, so para aduma is the animal that we had actually in this past week's parsha, so we can call this a daf yomi coincidence. That, and an egla arufa, that's talking about a situation where a person is found murdered, and we're not sure who did it, and we need to figure out what and so what they do is they have a ceremony where the people in the closest city bring an animal and break its back. And so as a result, egla rufa, but for an egla rufa, that kind of work is not considered problematic. Ad shetimshok, but it actually has to engage in some sort of mashicha, some sort of dragging of a yoke. So,
but isn't it chumash regarding the paradum? It says lo alav ala all. You can't even put anything. That's a yoke. You can't put anything on it, right?
Correct. Well, the point is that the question is how far do we go? Do we say, like Rob, that even this bag of bags and not a yoke? Because a bag of bags is less than a yoke. So the question is a yoke just an example, or is a yoke meant to be dafka? So that's exactly the debate. That's exactly what the Rav Yehuda Amarav is telling us, is that from his perspective, and I don't know whether there are people who disagree with it, but the bottom line is that I'm sorry. So the point is Mar Savar Chayshinan. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, we're worried about the possibility that this non-Jew, not realizing, he may know. In fact, we're going to say that the non-Jew knows that if he's trying to sell a paraduma animal to the Jews, it better be one that has never done work. And so, but he doesn't realize that this would also be considered work. And so as a result, Rabbi Eliezer says we need to be worried about it. Umar, and whereas the rabbis, the Chachamim Savar, lo chashin, and they say we don't have to be worried. So that might be the real debate. So the answer is no, lo sakataitik. Don't think that way, because mishum nicha porta lo masituva. No, really, according to Gemara's Maskana, everybody knows that you can't put anything on this animal and still sell it to the Jews, because the Jews are going to pay a lot of money, and you're going to lose every penny of that money if you hundreds of thousands of dollars. So if you see a red heifer, that's a cow that is all red, you're very wealthy if you find that. So mishum nicha porta lo mafsituva, nobody's going to lose that amount of money. So one second though, now you're telling me that nobody's going to lose that amount of money as a result of putting putting a bag of bags on top of it. But then you're telling me that they're going to lose that money because they're going to engage in bestiality. Hachanami lema mishum hana porta lo mafsituva. Maybe we should say, Mark, they could use your help. Maybe they should say that, you know what? We should say the fact that that because of a little bit of enjoyment that you're going to get from engaging in bestiality, the person's going to forfeit so much money. So hasam yitzro tokfo. No, in the end we say no. It's not. Yes, it's true they're going to lose that money, but it's there. The yetzer hara is so great, the desire is so great that they won't be able to overcome it. So let's do our second tosos now. The last tosos on Kaf Gimel Amar Aleph. Hasam Yitzro Takvo. Tema le'el de Amarav Obed Kochavim Chasal Behem To. 1 second. Earlier we saw that Rav said that we were worried about that an idolater is worried about the value of his animal. And so as a result, he won't engage in bestiality. And now you're telling me that he'll engage in bestiality and lose the hundreds of thousands of dollars of whatever that it would he would earn from that animal?
Just do Tamura. Give him another animal.
No, but remember the issue is that he's owned this animal. So Tamura won't, switching the animal, giving a trade with him would obviously help him going forward. But the question is, do we have to be worried that he already engaged in bestiality with this animal? And Rebbe Padas Nami Isleyahu Shnuya. And according to Tosos, even Rebbe Padas would agree that when it comes to an idol worshiper, that he wouldn't engage in bestiality with his own animal. Kida Parishas naming Yitzro Takbo. So and so as a result, he would in fact And so how do we understand that? Mikol Shekain. And so as a result, we should be saying that he should certainly engage it. De para de damim yikarim, when it comes to para aduma, it's way more valuable. So why are we saying, like Rav said before, that an idolater would not engage in bestiality with his own animal? So yesh lomer shiny hachav. No, this case is different. Because what was the concern about bestiality with your own animal? The concern was that you engaging in that bestiality will cause the animal to be impotent, to no longer be able to have children. But if that's true, doesn't make a difference whether it's discovered, whether you're caught engaging in it or not. It happens. It's a fact. Whereas when it comes to bestiality with this para aduma animal, the only way that it would actually reduce your amount is if you got caught engaging in it. So yesh lomer shiny hacha kaven didameha yikarim omedis limkor liyisrael, because it's so valuable to sell to a Jew. V'kevan shehu vaday mocher, he's definitely going to sell it. So as a result, he's not worried about the impact on it having children or not. Hapara. He's definitely going to sell this animal. The savarhu lahalim, and maybe he'll think that he could just hide the fact that he engaged in it. Ve'enu choshesh, and as a result, he's not going to be concerned about it. Kevash yitzra takvo, he won't be worried about the fact that his yetzer is going to overcome him. So the point is as a result, that's why Rabbi Eliezer says you cannot buy it. You cannot buy the animal. Whereas, on the other hand, the Chachamim would say you can buy the animal because we're not worried about it. So the bottom line is that we still say at least the first challenge has failed, and we're Rabbi Padas's answer of that in fact Rabbi Eliezer is worried about bestiality and the Chachamim are not, is the possible answer to our apparent contradiction. And our Mishnah follows the Rabbi Eliezer, and the Mishnah elsewhere that says you can buy the animal from you can buy an animal for a sacrifice from an idolater follows the Chachamim.
Is there a maskana?
That is going to be our maskana.
But lafi halacha, can you or not? Can you not buy the animal?
Yes, you know. In the end, I think you can buy an animal from a non-Jew, from an idolater, and use it as a sacrifice. That is for sure the halacha.
Even the red heifer, even the paraduma?
And I would say even the red heifer. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, it's not applicable today, but I'm pretty sure that would be the halacha also. The Dilma de Kuli Alma. So now challenge number 2 to Rabbi Padas. The Dilma de Kuli Alma lo chashin l'Rabbi. Maybe again, nobody's concerned about engaging in bestiality. And maybe the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer is actually based on what Sheila says. And what does Sheila say? To Tani Sheila, my time of Rabbi Eliezer. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer? Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yichlecha. Right in the beginning of Parshas Chukas, it says that tell the Jewish people that they should take. And what's the pun or the gzera that the gzeras hakasuv that we're going to take from the word v'yichu? Bnei Yisrael yakichu, that you can only buy it from a Jew who sells it. V'ein ha'ovdei kochavim yakichu. So because of the juxtaposition of Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael, and v'yichu, the point is not just that the Jews have to be the ones to buy it, but the Jews have to be the ones to sell it. So maybe that's how Rabbi Eliezer paskins, and that's why he says it. And so it has nothing to do with bestiality at all. No, lo sakatai. Don't think that that's the only reason for Rabbi Eliezer. De katani seifa, because the end of our Mishnah of the Mishnah, where he says that you're not allowed to buy a paraduma, v'chein haya Rabbi Eliezer posel b'kol karbanat kulan. He also prohibits buying any other sacrifice, unlike the position elsewhere. So the isal kadaita kadatani shila, and if you say that it's like Sheila, bishlam paraksiv bakicha, it makes sense with respect to the paraduma because we have the word kicha, and so as a result, that's why you have to be a Jew to sell it. But elakula karbanos kicha ksibu. But does it say kicha with respect to every other sacrifice? No, it doesn't. Not. And so as a result, Rabbi Eliezer must on some level also be concerned about bestiality. We will come back to Sheila's statement very shortly because it will bring us back to Dama ben Atina, the famous story of one of the most famous non-Jews that is mentioned in the Gemara, but we will get to that at the very end of today, God willing. So,
but the animal could fall into that, whatever. Farmer could wake up in the morning and he has a red heifer. If you hold it according to Sheila, the non-Jewish farmer would never be able to sell that animal to a Jew,
that's
right?
correct. That's correct. And we're going to see how we get around it if according to Sheila. Vidilma ad kan lo pligi rabbanan ale de Rabbi Elazar. Or, so our second challenge has also failed. We come now to our third and final challenge, which I've scrolled to the top of the screen. Vidilma ad kan lo pligi rabbanan ale de Rabbi Eliezer. Maybe, in fact, the rabbis don't argue with Rabbi Eliezer. Ela befara de dameha Yikarin. Maybe everybody agrees that in fact we are worried about bestiality as we turn to Kaf Gimel Amabet, and it's only with respect to the paraduma because it's so valuable that that no non-Jew would be willing to think about engaging in bestiality with it, and so therefore they won't be worried about Bashar Karbanos Modula. But maybe with respect to every other sacrifice, they would agree to Rabbi Eliezer. But 1 second, if that were true, but we have a brisa that said with the brisa again that we used as the basis of our original contradiction with our own Mishnah. Who would be the opinion in that brisa? Because that brisa says you specifically can buy animals from idolaters in order to bring a sacrifice. Money. Who is it? Lo Rabbi Eliezer, below Rabbanan. It's nobody. It's not Rabbi Eliezer and it's not the rabbis. But Tanya Behedja, and specifically we have in a brisa, my osivu lechavrohi le Rabbi Eliezer. How did his friends, the rabbis, respond to Rabbi Eliezer? They said, Kol son kedar yikav tzulach ya'alu l'ratzon al mizbechi. We have a pasuk in Yeshaya that seems to suggest that the flocks of non-Jews, namely the people in Kedar, will be gathered by the Jews and they will be brought up on the altar. So that shows that, in fact, we are not worried about the animals of idolaters. We will allow them to be brought up on the altar. And so as a result, that shows that it can't be about bestiality. So that is a decent proof. Obviously, Rabbi Eliezer would say that must be a special situation, or it's a special situation for the future, or whatever. But the bottom line is that all three of our challenges have failed, and so as a result, that Rabbi Padas has offered us another understanding of the contradiction between our Mishnah and the Brisa that says. I may have referred to it as a Mishnah, but the Brisa that says that you're allowed to buy an animal from an idolater to use as a sacrifice.
And we're not concerned about bestiality.
And we're not concerned about bestiality. That's exactly right. So, ad kan lo pligi ela b'chashasha. Now, what is the implication of all of this? So, having mentioned the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim regarding purchasing a para aduma from an idolater, the Gemara attempts to derive a related law, but we'll see that in fact it's not going to be successful in this derivation. Ad kan lo pligi ela b'chashasha. The implication is that the only time you're not worried about the idolater having engaged in bestiality is when you don't know whether they engaged in bestiality. But where you do know, Pasla, everybody would agree that the para aduma would be puzzle. Well, shmami na de para kache mizbeachi. Well, that shows that a para aduma is considered like something that's offered on the altar. Now, remember, the para aduma is not, in fact, ever brought on the altar. It is burned outside the Beis Hamikdash, and so as a result, I might have thought I might have thought that it's treated like the holy items that are only for temple upkeep. But if that were the true, if there was sodomy, would it be prohibited? So, for example, if you donate a donkey, which cannot be offered as a sacrifice, so therefore, when you donate a donkey to the Beis Hamikdash, it is going to be sold and used as the money is going to be used for the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. If that animal had engaged in bestiality, there's nothing wrong with having donated it and having it go to the Beis Hamikdash and having the money go to the Beis Hamikdash, because because it's only the money. It's not the animal itself. There's no sanctification, and yet we're saying even though the para aduma is offered not on the altar, we're going to say that it's prohibited. And so doesn't that show that we treat the para aduma just like an animal that's offered on the sacrifice? Not necessarily. Shiny para. No, maybe a paraduma is different. Dechatas karya rachmana. Again, in this past week's parsha, which it refers to in this is where is it? Bamidbar Parak Yutet Pasuk Tet. It refers to the paraduma as chatas, as a chatasi. And so as a result, even though in that context it's referring to the nature of sprinkling of the water and the whole process of the purification, and not really to a sin offering, the fact that it uses that word shows that the laws associated with the sin offering would apply. But 1 second, elameata tipasel biyotze dofin. But if that's true, if you're going to say that all the laws of a sacrifice apply to a para aduma, then you know what should also apply to a para aduma? The fact is that if it was born through a C-section, you would not be allowed to use it as a sacrifice, because you're not allowed to bring a C-section baby as a sacrifice, a C-section baby from an animal that's kosher for the sacrifice. And if you want to tell me, no, you're right, you would not be able to bring a C-section baby as a para aduma. Alama Tanya, but we have a brisa that shows that there's an opinion that says you can. Hikadisha biyotze dofin, that if when it comes to something that is trying to sanctify something as a para aduma, that when it went out through the wall, as we know, again, a C-section baby, psula, it's puzzle. Rabbi Shimon machshir, but Rabbi Shimon says it's kosher. Well, how could Rabbi Shimon say it's kosher? Rabbi Shimon l'taimei. And if you want to say, well, okay, well, Rabbi Shimon is just following his own reasoning, and therefore there's no problem with him saying that it's kosher because it's a different context. The Amar Yotze Dovin Vlad Baal Yahu, because he says that when a baby is born through a C-section, it's a totally fine child, and it's treated no different than one that exits the womb naturally. But Rabbi Yochanan himself said, in explaining Rabbi Shimon, Moda Haya Rabbi Shimon le'inyan kodshim she'enu kadosh, that when it comes to sacrifices, all sacrifices, he says that you're not allowed to bring a C-section animal as a sacrifice. And so how could he allow a para aduma that was a C-section? So Ella, shiny para. So as a result, it can't be that the difference is based on the word chatas, but rather hol umum poselba. No, since the Torah specifically says that the animal cannot have a mum, that it needs to be tamimah, therefore Devar erva avodah zarah nami pasulba. So too, engaging in bestiality with it or idolatry of it will also disqualify it. Diksiv kimash chasam bahem mumbam, that when it says in Vayikra Parakaf Bet Pasuk Kaf Hey, that when it comes to their corruption is in them, a blemish is in them. This juxtaposition of corruption and blemish tell us the following: V'tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, Kol Mokum Sha'amar Shenamar Hashchasa. Anytime where it says that there's corruption, what does it mean? Einu Ela Devar Erva V'Avodah Zarah. It refers to both illicit relations and idolatry. How do I know that? Devar erva diksiv, because when it comes to illicit relations, it's because it says ki hishchis kol basar estar kol al haaretz. This is from Bereshis Parak Vav Pasuk Yubet, in connection with the flood and how the people of the world were all acting immorally, and so that's the immoral actions that they were taking was in connection with was illicit relations. V'avodah zarah diksiv, and we know that it can also mahashchasa can refer to avodah zarah, because it says pen tashchisun v'asisem lachem petzel, lest you act corruptly and make yourselves a carved image. So that itself makes clear that that's talking about idolatry. So v'ha paranami, and so as a result, just as when it comes to every other sacrifice, we say that if given that it has to be complete, an animal without any blemish, so too the paradama has to be without any blemish. And so just like a regular sacrifice, when it says no blemish, it also means it can't be have engaged in bestiality or idolatry or been worshipped as an idol. So too with respect to the paraduma, it also hoil umum posaba, since a mum would make it disqualified, so as a invalid. So dabar erva avodas kochav and pesleba. So too having relations or idolatry would also make it or worshiping it as an idol would also make it invalid as a paraduma. And so as a result, now we can understand how Rabbi Shimon could still hold his position with respect to a C-section baby. And so as a result, we've been able to prove nothing about the sanctification of the paraduma. Maybe the sanctification is really like money that you dedicated to the Beis Hamikdash, but because of these special reasons, it also has the prohibition that it can't have a mum, and it can't have engaged in bestiality, and it cannot have been worshipped as an idol. So earlier, the Gemara quote Sheila, and this is where we're going to conclude. The Gemara quoted Sheila by explaining that Rabbi Eliezer's prohibition of buying a paraduma from an idolater is based on the wording of the pasuk in the Torah, that it says vayikhu b'nei Yisrael vayikhu, that they took, and we say yikachu, that it means that they also have to be the ones to sell. But now we're going to raise the question of what about the famous story of Dama ben Natina. So let's take a look. Gufa Tani Sheila, my time of the Rabbi Eliezer Dixiv Daber al Bnei Yisrael v'yikhu. Right, we cited the pasuk Bnei Yisrael yakichu v'yein ha'ovdei kochavim yakichu, that it means that only the Jewish people can sell, not a non-Jewish person. So not an idolater. Elameata, 1 second. If you're going to say that, what about the following in the beginning of Parshas Truma? Daber b'nei Yisrael v'yikuli truma, that they should take from me a truma. And what are the and hachanami divrei Yisrael yakichu? So shouldn't it be that only the Jewish people should be able to sell v'ein ha'ovdim kochavim yakichu, and not an idolater? V'chitema hachinami. And if you tell me yes, you're absolutely right. Only a Jewish person can sell all of the things that were needed for the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan. V'hamar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel Shaluas Rabbi Eliezer. They asked Rabbi Eliezer, Ad heichan kibud avaim, how far does one need to go in respecting one's parents? So Amar lahem, Rabbi Eliezer responded, Tzu'u or ma asa ovid kulchavim echad la'avid ba'ashkelon. Listen to the story of one idol worshiper who really respected his parents in Ashkelon, and this is highlighting the fact that it makes a lot of sense to work to engage in kibbud av, in respecting one's parents and honoring one's parents. V'dama ben Nesina Shmo, and his name was Dama ben Nesina. Pamachas bikshu mimenu avanim le'ephod. The Jewish people wanted to buy from him an ephod stone, a stone for the ephod. Now remember, the ephod was one of the things that is mentioned at the beginning of Parshas
Truma, no?
And so as a result, it's mentioned in connection with Truma, and so as a result, you should only be able to buy it from a Jew. And yet, who is it being bought from right now? It's being brought from Dama ben Nesina, who we just said is an idolater. And how much were they willing to pay? Turn to Kafdal Amud Aleph. B'shishim ribo sachar. They were going to pay him 600,000. Rav Kahana masne b'shmonim ribo, and Rav Kahana said it was 800,000. V'hayu maftechos munachos tachas meroshasav shel aviv. And yet the key to the lockbox where the stone was beneath his father's pillow, below Tziaro, and he didn't bother him. He didn't wake him up. Now, Rav Moshe actually says, well, I don't understand. Like everybody, the father must have wanted it. So he actually explains that no, in fact, we have to say that Dama ben Nesina's father was kind of crazy, and that Nesina was kind of crazy, and he wouldn't have wanted the money. We're dealing with a situation where he and the point is that it was the son who would have gotten the money. And so as a result, the son need to forfeit essentially the opportunity to gain a lot of money in order to respect his father. So Avnei Shoham, So now, but again, the question is how could we want to buy the stones from the for the ephod from a non-Jew? That we specifically say the same drasha of Vayikhu bnei Yisrael Vayikhu. So Avnei Shoham Hifsik Ha'inyan. No, because and Rashi explains that there is the letter Vav in between every almost every word that is immediately after Vayikhu Elecha truma, that you should take for me a truma, of a kuli truma, that it says and therefore for all those things that come where it says and this, as Rashi says, avnei shoam hifsik ha'inyan mideloksiv v'ev avnei shoam. It doesn't say and the avnei shoam kediksiv bekulo, like it says with everything else, v'kesef, v'nechoshes, v'techelas, utechelas, uve'argaman, v'oros, meaning every other word, it has a vav with it. And so as a result, when it comes to all those items you need to buy from a Jew. But in connection with this item, you don't need to buy it from a Jew. At least that's our thinking at the moment. 1 second, though, avnei miluim ksiv. But right after avnei shoam, it says avnei miluim dehadar arve, which goes back and says that, oh, you know what? You need to tie it back to the beginning, and therefore all of these items should be covered. And so as a result, va'od, and moreover, you can't get away by pointing only to the Avnei Shoham, because Katani Seva, don't forget the end of the story with Dama ben Netzina, that when he didn't sell the stone, Lashana Acheres Nolda Lo Paraduma Be'edro, he got a Paraduma, and Nichnasu Chachmei Yisrael Etzlo, and so the Chachamim went to him and Amar Lahem, and they said to him, Yodea, and he said to them, excuse me, Yodea Ani Bachem, I know about you guys, She'im Ani Mevakesh Mikem Kol Mamon Sheba'olam Atem Nosnimli, you'd give me whatever I ask for. So as a result, but Achshab, but the only money that I care about is just pay me what I was going to get last year that I lost because I was honoring my father. So the question from this story is, I don't understand. How could they buy the para aduma from Dama ben Netzina? So the answer is Hasam Ayadei Tagre Yisrael Zavam. Now, the point is that according to Shiloh's drasha, it is not that it could never have been owned by an idolater. It is just saying that it can't directly come from the idolater. So what the Chachamim were going to do is they were going to have Jewish merchants buy the item, and then they were going to have those Jewish merchants sell them the item. And so as a result, whether it's with respect to the Para Aduma or with respect to the Avnei Shoham, that would be how you would go get around the prohibition that says that you cannot buy these items directly from an idolater.
But he sold it to the Jewish merchant, right? So he sold it to a Jew.
Yes.
So I mean, wasn't that our question? That a Jew couldn't buy it from the Ovdei Kachavim? We ultimately the rabbis bought it from a Jewish merchant, but the Jewish merchant bought it from him.
Right, but the Jewish merchant wasn't buying. The Jewish merchant didn't offer it as a paraduma. He bought it as an animal. He bought it as an investment animal to immediately sell to the Jew to the Beis Hamikdash in order for it to be brought as a paraduma. But he himself does not bring it as a paraduma, and therefore the prohibition doesn't apply. And again, remember, we're paskening like the Chachamim. The Chachamim say that you can buy the paraduma from a non-Jew. And the question, though, is just how do we understand Shiloh's drasha? Shiloh's drasha says v'yikhu, that it says b'nei Yisrael v'yikhu, and with respect to the paraduma, and therefore you need to buy the animal directly from a Jew. How do we understand? How can Shiloh fit in this discussion? And the answer is that Shiloh would say that's fine. The Chachamim can also agree with me that with this drasha. And the point is that the way that you understand the story is the fact that they bought it indirectly. And so as a result, and when it comes to the Xeris HaKasuv, not with respect to the concern about not with respect to the concern about bestiality, but when it comes to the Xeris HaKasav of the Chuli, or Bnei Israel V'Yaku at the Paraduma, that is only when you buy it directly, when the Beis Hamikdash buys the animal directly from the idolater. But if they buy it indirectly, if first a Jewish merchant buys it, so then it would be permitted because that Xeris HaKasav would not apply.
But
So
the pasuk doesn't specifically talk about the Beit Hamikdash. It says, or the way Shiloh interprets it, it's v'yichu or v'yachichu.
no, but it's specifically referring to the paraduma. Until the Beis Hamikdash buys it, it's not a paraduma. So it's not a paraduma. Let me just finish, and if you have still questions, and we can discuss it further. I want to let people go. So we've now shown is that according to Shiloh, Rabbi Eliezer is concerned about the word v'yikhu in order to prohibit purchasing a paraduma from an idolater. So the Gemara wonders, 1 second, is Rabbi Eliezer also concerned of bestiality? Meaning, have we undermined his whole concern and is the only concern about this and not about bestiality? So that's the discussion that the Gemara is going to pick up with, God willing, on tomorrow's daf. So I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. And if you still have a question, let me
but how is this?
I'm happy to hold on just a second. I'll stop the recording and we can have further discussion.
I don't understand how that